Good evening. I'm Susan Phillips. Welcome to openglen.com. We're glad you're here. I am the pastor of First Presbyterian Church and serve the larger community around the Shawano area. And Open Glen is a space we hope will be open conversation, community building, and consideration of generous sense of grace. Tonight we're going to be talking about ethnicity, color, race, privilege, and how some of those intersect in just a few minutes. If you're online, I invite you to write in and share some of your experience, your early awareness of ethnicity or color difference. Share those with us and ask some questions if you wish. I wanted to tell you a story about growing up as a little girl in Springfield, Missouri. I grew up as a white kid in a white town, and there was hardly any ethnic difference that we were aware of in that part of the world. I had no awareness at all of my ethnic background, my heritage, the places from which my ancestors came, except for one Cherokee great-great-grandmother way back when. We're not even sure of her name, but that was the one story I knew. As a little bitty girl, 4, 5, 6 years old, my mom would take me to the fairgrounds where the Cherokee community would have powwows, and I would be invited to dance in the sawdust. And the sound of the drums and the voices and the bells on people's ankles was a joy for me and a place of excitement. But I also had these children's books at home that had drawings and paintings of beautiful, romantic Native people. The women were always in white buckskin dresses, and their hair was always brushed and braided back, and everything was pastoral and serene. But I would also watch John Wayne movies with my dad, and this was in the day when we had televisions. You would actually have to get up and go change the channel on the dial, and somehow or other I could tell as a little bitty kid, 6, 7 years old, that between the John Wayne movies, the romantic pretty books, and the real people that I met who drove pickup trucks and drank Coca-Cola, somebody was lying. Those 3 stories couldn't all be true. Now, I didn't know what to do with that as a little bitty kid. I didn't have words to describe it. I didn't have anyone who was discussing it with me. The only thing I can remember is that when I played Cowboys and Indians with the kid down the street, I was always the Indian, and I always won. Somehow, as a little bitty kid, it was my intent to redress history. I knew that the lie was real, and somehow I wanted to make it right. Now, playing with the kid down the street didn't really change anything, except it changed my perspective on the world. It made me aware that something was different, that something was amiss. And so it gave me some perspective that I might not otherwise have. Now I would call that perspective, that difference, privilege. Because I have a choice. I get to choose whether or not to pay attention. I get to choose whether or not to wear a Black Lives Matter button. I can wear it, I can not wear it. It doesn't make any difference. Because I have privilege. Other people don't have the choice of whether or not to value their own lives. A friend of mine gave it to me, and so I'm choosing to wear it. But I'm also aware that that is my privilege. Having the choice is what makes the difference between having privilege and not, having power and not. And we have policies and practices in our country, in our culture, in our institutions that create fewer choices for some people than for others. And they're all different kinds of privilege, and they're all different kinds of ways that some of us have it and some of us don't. And they're all different ways that we recognize the privilege we have, or use it or not. So my challenge in our conversation is that if we want to build communities that are more just, then we have to be aware of our own privilege. We need to listen carefully to those who don't have it and learn from their experiences. We get to choose whether or not to listen. So we don't get to give up our privilege, but we can privilege someone else's voice. We can listen to someone else's experience and lift it higher and value it. So if you have some experiences that you can chime in and type into us, let us know. Jared's on the computer helping me out tonight. For me, that little girl who was aware, before I had language to describe it, that something was wrong, that someone was lying, still compels me as a grown-up to want to make the world a better place, to make the world a place where people don't have to fear their neighbors, who aren't taught to fear each other, to build a place where we all get to live with more justice, more freedom, more love, more grace, because we're children of God. Hey, Jared, what do you think about any of this?
I think that so much of our interaction with people that are different than us and have different life experiences than us come from I think that there's an openness that we can have, but it has to come from an early time. There has to be some developmental experiences at an early age for us to be fully and completely open, which kind of puts it into the hands of the parents to say, this is our world, it's much broader than you might think. Does that make sense?
That could be a challenge if the parents themselves haven't had those experiences.
This is true.
And it's also the case that kids today, our kids, are growing up in a much more diverse community than most of us probably did. Just because there are more people who have more different varieties of ethnicities and languages and cultures intersecting one another. And I think there is more space for it. It does remind me, though, Brian McLaren talks about how when there are major transformations in people's lives, that they usually come from one of two experiences: great love or great pain. And so it's entirely possible that whatever blind spots we might have, whatever biases we might have, those get called into question because we've made a new friend who holds us accountable for some of the ridiculous things that we've learned, which simply aren't true. The lies like I had learned growing up with. Or maybe we lose a friend because of those same biases, and that pain causes us to question what it is we've thought, what it is we've been taught, how it is we interact, what assumptions we make. Assumptions. So maybe that gives us three options. So if young ones have an experience, if we can love well, if we can grow through our pain, maybe those are three different ways that we can try to make the world a better place. It also makes me think about if I am willing to set aside my own perspective and listen to other people's experiences and other people's stories, I may well experience that love or that pain through their experience and let their experience convict me, challenge me, invite me to recognize my privilege, to recognize my biases, to recognize the way in which policies or laws need to change. I recently read that kids of color get less pain medication in ERs than white kids do. And I've talked to some of my friends who are physicians who are astonished by that, and they start questioning their own practice. one of the big national banks was just fined millions, hundreds of millions of dollars last month because they were intentionally charging customers of color higher percents on their mortgages. When that happens, wait a second, how do we do business? Churches turn people away and make them feel uncomfortable because they don't look like whomever else might be in the room. And we have to remember that, oh yeah, Jesus was not a white guy. And maybe it helps us step back from our biases and engage in a better way, in a more loving way, in a more faithful way. So maybe an invitation for this next month, because I think we need invitations. It's a challenge if you want. I would love to hear what happens if you could go out of your usual space and go meet someone and listen to someone else's story. Maybe it's something you read, maybe it's over lunch or a cup of coffee, but go and meet someone whose experience is different from yours and ask if they would be willing to share a story. And then consider how that challenges what you thought you knew. Let that story sink in. Let it become part of the larger story in your community. Because these are all stories of people of God, children of God, with whom we are called into community, in this open space, in this open glen, for God's sake, for love's sake. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time.